The interrogation begins. The detention cell doors slid open with a mechanical hiss. Captain Elena Rodriguez walked into the stark white room, her hands bound behind her back with energy restraints that glowed a soft blue. Her military uniform was torn and stained, evidence of the brutal campaign that had ended just 3 weeks ago. Despite her circumstances, she held her head high, dark eyes scanning the room with the practiced alertness of a seasoned soldier. Commander Thiss waited at the metal table, his reptilian features showing no emotion. His scaled skin was a deep green, and his yellow eyes tracked Elena's every movement as she was forced into the chair across from him. The Caltharian officer had interviewed hundreds of prisoners over his long career, but something about this human woman made him uneasy. "State your name and rank for the record," Thiss said, his voice carrying the slight hiss common to his species. "Captain Elena Rodriguez, Terran Defense Force, serial number 7749 Delta Prime," she replied calmly, as if she were reporting to her own commanding officer rather than an enemy interrogator. Thiss opened the thick file before him and began reading. Captain Rodriguez, age 32, born on Earth Colony, New Houston. Graduated top of your class from Terran Military Academy. Served in 7 major campaigns before the Coalition War. Decorated for valor at the Siege of Proxima, the Battle of Wolf 359, and the defense of the Titan shipyards. He looked up at her. Impressive record for someone so young. Elena said nothing, simply staring back at him with those unsettling human eyes. Thiss continued reading. Commander of the 15th Tactical Response Unit, also known as the Problem Solvers. Unit specialization: unconventional warfare and adaptive tactics. He paused, studying her face. Your unit was responsible for some of the most creative solutions we encountered during the war. We did our job, Elena said simply. Your job, Thiss repeated, setting down the file. Do you know why you're here, Captain? I assume you want to understand how a primitive species like humanity managed to defeat the most advanced military coalition in the galaxy, Elena replied, a slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Thiss felt a chill run down his spine. Even as a prisoner, facing possible execution, this human showed no fear. It was the same attitude that had made fighting humans such a nightmare for coalition forces. The war is over, Thiss said. The coalition has withdrawn from human space. We're trying to understand what happened, to learn from our mistakes. Mistakes, Elena echoed. That's an interesting way to put it. Thiss activated the recording device on the table. Its red light began to blink steadily. Let's start with the Omega Protocol. Our intelligence reports mentioned it frequently, but we never understood what it meant. Elena leaned back in her chair, the energy restraints humming softly. The Omega Protocol wasn't a weapon or a battle plan. It was a philosophy. Explain. When your forces first invaded human space, you followed standard coalition doctrine. Overwhelming force, technological superiority, quick, decisive battles. You expected us to fight like every other species you'd conquered. Stand and fight, fall back when overwhelmed, surrender when defeat was certain. Thiss nodded. Logical military strategy used by every civilized species in the galaxy. But humans aren't like every other species, Elena said, her voice taking on an edge. We don't just adapt to circumstances. We change the circumstances to suit us. The Caltharian commander made notes on his datapad. Give me an example. Elena was quiet for a moment, her eyes distant as if seeing something far away. Mining Station Alpha 9. Do you remember that engagement? Thiss consulted his files. 3rd week of the war. Strategic mining facility in the Vega system. Coalition forces attempted to capture it intact. The operation was unsuccessful. Unsuccessful, Elena laughed, but there was no humor in it. Is that what your reports called it? Tell me what happened from your perspective. Elena began to speak, and Thiss found himself drawn into her account despite himself. I was stationed at Alpha 9 when your first wave hit. 12,000 coalition soldiers, state-of-the-art equipment, orbital support. We had maybe 300 personnel, mostly civilian miners and technicians. No heavy weapons, no military fortifications, no backup coming. You should have surrendered, Thys said. Should have, but you made one critical error in your intelligence assessment. Which was? You assumed that because Alpha 9 was a mining station, it was defenseless. You didn't understand that humans don't see tools and weapons as separate categories. Thys felt that chill again. He had read the after-action reports from Alpha 9, but they had never made complete sense. Elena continued. We had mining lasers designed to cut through asteroid rock. Took us about an hour to modify them into anti-ship weapons. Industrial fabricators that could print spare parts became ammunition factories. The gravity manipulators used to move ore became weapons that could crush your dropships like tin cans. That's impossible. Mining equipment isn't designed for military use. That's your problem right there, Elena said, leaning forward. You think in categories. This is a tool. This is a weapon. This is civilian. This is military. Humans don't think that way. We see potential in everything. Thys made more notes, his writing becoming more urgent. Continue. The real surprise came when your ground forces landed. You sent heavy assault troops, the best the coalition had. They were expecting to fight miners and technicians with small arms and improvised defenses. What did they find instead? Elena smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. They found 300 humans who had just turned an entire mining facility into the galaxy's most elaborate death trap. She paused, gathering her thoughts. We used the mining tunnels as a weapon. Shaped charges to collapse specific sections, creating maze-like corridors that funneled your troops into kill zones. The atmospheric processors became chemical weapons dispensers. Even the cafeteria became a weapons platform. How? Industrial food synthesizers can break down organic matter into component molecules. Turns out they're also very good at creating toxic gas clouds when you feed them the right materials. Thys felt sick. You turned your own life support systems into weapons. We turned everything into weapons. The artificial gravity generators, the waste recycling systems, the emergency lighting, even the music system became part of our defense network. Music system. Background music. We reprogrammed it to play specific tones that interfered with coalition communication frequencies. Your soldiers couldn't coordinate their attacks because their radios were filled with human elevator music. Despite himself, Thys found this almost amusing. Almost. What was the final outcome? Elena's expression grew serious. Of the 12,000 coalition soldiers who landed on Alpha 9, fewer than 2,000 made it back to their ships. They had superior numbers, better weapons, advanced technology, and orbital support. We had mining equipment and human ingenuity. And Alpha 9? Completely destroyed. The final phase of our defense was to detonate the station's fusion reactor, took out the remaining coalition forces, and created a debris field that damaged 3 of your capital ships. Thys stopped writing. You destroyed your own facility. Of course, that was always part of the plan. But you lost everything. The strategic value of the station, the resources, the infrastructure. Elena stared at him with those unsettling human eyes. Commander, you still don't understand. We never intended to hold Alpha 9. The station was never the objective. Then what was? Fear. The word hung in the air between them like a physical presence. Thys felt his scales ripple involuntarily. Elena continued, her voice soft, but carrying the weight of absolute certainty. After Alpha 9, every coalition commander had to wonder, what are these humans going to turn into weapons? Every tool, every piece of equipment, every seemingly innocent facility became a potential threat. Your forces started seeing weapons everywhere because they learned that humans can turn anything into a weapon. Thys realized he was gripping his pen so tightly his claws were leaving marks in the metal. That's psychological warfare. That's human warfare. We don't just fight with our hands or our weapons. We fight with our minds, our creativity, our refusal to accept limitations. But the cost, Thys protested. 300 humans died at Alpha 9. 300 humans died so that millions more could live. We bought time, we bought fear, and we bought something even more valuable. What? Elena leaned back in her chair, and for a moment she looked tired beyond her years. We bought hope. Every human in the galaxy heard about Alpha 9. They learned that we could fight back, that we could win, that the coalition wasn't invincible. That hope spread faster than your ships could travel. Thys made a final note and looked up at Elena. Is that when the Broken Arrow Protocol was implemented? For the first time since entering the room, Elena's composure cracked slightly. A shadow crossed her face, and she was quiet for a long moment. That's a story for another day, Commander. The turning point. Commander Thys entered the interrogation room the next morning to find Elena already seated at the table, staring at the wall with an expression he couldn't read. The human prisoner looked like she hadn't slept, which was unusual. Most humans he had encountered could sleep anywhere, under any circumstances. It was one of their more disturbing traits. Captain Rodriguez, he said, taking his seat and activating the recording device. You mentioned the Broken Arrow Protocol yesterday. I need to understand what that means. Elena turned to look at him, and Thys saw something in her eyes that made him uncomfortable. Not fear, not anger, but something deeper. Something that spoke of choices made and prices paid. The Broken Arrow Protocol, she said slowly, was humanity's answer to total war. Explain. Elena was quiet for a moment, then began to speak. 3 months into the war, it became clear that the coalition intended to exterminate humanity. Not just defeat us, not just occupy our worlds, but wipe us out completely. Your War Council made that decision after the incident at Kepler Station. Thys consulted his files. Kepler Station, civilian research facility. Coalition forces attempted to capture it intact to study human technology. The station was lost. Lost, Elena repeated. Is that what your report said? The station was destroyed in what appeared to be a reactor malfunction. All personnel were killed, including the coalition boarding party. Elena shook her head. There was no malfunction, Commander. Kepler Station was destroyed by its own people. That's impossible. Why would civilians destroy their own research facility? Because they weren't just civilians. They were humans. Elena stood up and walked to the wall, pressing her bound hands against the cold metal. Kepler Station was home to 8,000 people. Researchers, support staff, families. When your ships arrived, they had no weapons, no defenses, no way to fight back. So they surrendered. They voted. Thys looked up from his notes. Voted? Democracy, Commander. It's a human concept. They held an election to decide what to do. 8,000 people, including children, voting on whether to surrender or die. And they chose to die. Elena turned to face him. They chose to fight. Dr. Sarah Chen, the station director, sent a message to Earth before the end. Do you know what she said? Thys shook his head. We cannot stop them, but we can show them what humanity is made of. Tell our families we chose to burn bright rather than fade away. Tell them we remembered what it means to be human. Elena returned to her chair, her movements slow and deliberate. The boarding party expected to find surrendering civilians. Instead, they found 8,000 humans who had spent their last hours turning a research station into the most sophisticated trap in the galaxy. What did they do? Everything. The scientists used their knowledge of physics and chemistry to create weapons your forces had never encountered. The engineers rigged every system on the station to fail in sequence, creating cascading disasters. The support staff turned the life support systems into distribution networks for chemical agents. Even the children helped, using their access to maintenance tunnels to plant explosives. Thys felt the familiar chill. Children? Human children learn to solve problems from a very early age. They see puzzles everywhere, challenges to overcome. To them, defeating the coalition boarding party was just another puzzle. That's monstrous. Elena's eyes flashed with anger. Monstrous. Your forces came to exterminate us. Every human adult, every human child, every human who had ever lived or ever would live. And you call our response monstrous. Thys realized he had struck a nerve. Continue with your account. Elena took a deep breath, visibly controlling her emotions. The coalition boarding party fought their way through the station level by level. Every corridor was trapped. Every room was a battlefield. The humans had no formal military training, but they had something more dangerous, which was desperation and creativity. They used laboratory equipment as weapons, turned research experiments into bombs, rewrote computer systems to create chaos. A xenobiology lab became a biological weapon when the scientists released modified bacteria that ate through coalition armor. A physics lab became a gravity weapon that crushed boarding parties with their own weight. Thys was writing frantically now, trying to capture every detail. How long did the battle last? 18 hours. 18 hours for a coalition elite unit to fight their way through 8,000 civilians. By the time they reached the station's central core, only 12 coalition soldiers were still alive. And the humans. Elena's voice became very quiet. All dead, every single one. But they had saved the best for last. What do you mean? Dr. Chen and her core team of researchers had spent those 18 hours turning the station's main computer core into the most sophisticated viral weapon ever created. When the coalition soldiers accessed the computer systems, they didn't just steal research data. They infected their own networks with a virus that would eventually spread through the entire coalition fleet. Thys felt the room growing colder. A computer virus. More than that. It was adaptive, evolving, learning. It studied coalition communication protocols, military databases, tactical systems. Within weeks, it had spread to every coalition ship, every space station, every command center. What did it do? Elena smiled, and this time there was dark satisfaction in her expression. It whispered. In the deep of space, when coalition soldiers were alone on watch, they would hear sounds in their communication systems, voices speaking in human languages, saying human names, telling human stories. At first, they thought it was malfunction or interference. Then they realized it was deliberate. Thys's scales were rippling with involuntary fear responses. Psychological warfare again. The virus had recorded the final messages from every human on Kepler station. Last words to families, love letters, children saying goodbye to their parents. It played these recordings randomly throughout coalition ships, a constant reminder of what they had done and what humans were willing to sacrifice. That's inhuman. Elena leaned forward, her eyes locked on Thys's. No, Commander. That's completely human. We remember our dead, we honor their sacrifice, and we make sure their enemies never forget what they did. But the psychological impact on our forces was devastating. Coalition soldiers started reporting nightmares, hallucinations, complete psychological breakdowns. They couldn't escape the voices of the humans they had killed. The virus made sure of that. Thys set down his pen with a shaking hand. Is that when the War Council decided to withdraw? That was when the War Council realized they weren't just fighting humans. They were fighting human nature itself. Elena stood up again, beginning to pace within the confines of her restraints. You see, Commander, the Coalition made a fundamental error in understanding what humans are. You thought we were just another species to be conquered, just another military force to be defeated. Weren't you? No. We're survivors. We're adapters. We're the species that crawled out of caves and built starships. We're the species that turned every setback into a comeback, every disaster into an opportunity. Thys looked at his notes, pages of increasingly frantic writing documenting humanity's unconventional approach to warfare. But you paid such a terrible price. Millions of humans died. Millions of humans chose to die so that billions could live. That's the difference between us and every other species in the galaxy. When backed into a corner, most species look for escape. Humans look for ways to bring the whole building down on their enemies' heads. Elena stopped pacing and looked directly at Thys. That's why the coalition withdrew. Not because you couldn't defeat our ships or our weapons. You withdrew because you realized that humans would never stop fighting, never stop adapting, never stop turning everything around them into weapons. And now you're afraid. Afraid of what we might do next, afraid of what new horrors human creativity might devise. You're afraid that the next time you encounter humans, we'll have had time to prepare. Thys realized he was holding his breath. Have you? Elena smiled, and it was the most terrifying expression Thys had ever seen on any face, human or alien. Commander, this interrogation wasn't about you learning our secrets. It was about us learning yours. Every question you've asked, every response you've made, every detail you've recorded has been transmitted to human intelligence networks throughout the galaxy. Thys looked at the recording device, its red light still blinking steadily. That's impossible. You're in restraints, under guard, completely isolated. Remember what I told you about humans turning everything into weapons? Did you really think we wouldn't find a way to turn this interrogation into an intelligence operation? Elena sat back down, her expression now calm and satisfied. Every coalition ship design in your files, every tactical manual you've referenced, every weakness you've inadvertently revealed is now in human hands. We've learned your languages, your technologies, your methods. How? The same way we won the war, Commander. We adapted. We improvised. We turned your own investigation into our advantage. Thys stared at her, the full scope of what had happened beginning to dawn on him. You let yourself be captured. I volunteered to be captured. The problem solvers always did specialize in unconventional solutions. Elena stood one final time, the energy restraints deactivating as hidden human operatives filled the room. Thys realized that his guards were gone, replaced by humans who had infiltrated the station with impossible stealth. Thank you for the debriefing, Commander, Elena said, rubbing her wrists where the restraints had been. This information will be very useful for future operations. As Thys was led away in the same restraints that had held Elena minutes before, he heard her voice one last time. Tell the Coalition War Council that humanity sends its regards, and remind them that humans have very long memories. The last thing Thys saw before the detention cell door closed was Elena Rodriguez sitting at the table, reviewing his notes with the satisfied expression of a problem solver who had just solved her biggest puzzle yet.